Thank you very much for coming along this morning. It's certainly a cold morning, hopefully a bit of a rainy day later on. But the purpose of here today is to talk about what's happening in the Loddon system. I'll be doing a fair bit of the talking. Most of the talking will be about the river system running out of Curran and Tullaroop. I've also got Brendan Cousins. Oh, there he is. Sorry, Brendan, I didn't see you. Who'll be talking a bit about the Mid-Loddon groundwater management area. But we'll be talking about what's happening this year with flows. The allocations were announced last Friday, and it was a big round zero for 4 of our systems, including the Loddon. And as you'll see during the presentation, that zero, there's a bit of a gap before we actually get into positive territory there. So we'll talk about some of the things that are confronting us this year and may confront yourselves. Hopefully won't with the conditions we're currently seeing, but we'll just run through that. So in terms of what we're going to be talking about, just a bit of a run through about, well, I've just done the run through about why we're here. Just a couple of quick words about the Loddon system itself. I'll then invite Brendan to speak about the Mid-Loddon, but then we'll come back and talk about, mainly focused on the regulated system. What's changed since the Millennium Drought? A few of you would have been in this situation probably 8 years ago, where we were having very low storages. Thankfully, we're not as low as we were at that point, but they are down considerably. Talk about what's happening at the moment, what are the things that we're seeing in terms of how catchments are responding, what the outlook is, what this means for yourselves as customers and takers of water, and what we're doing to assist through the season. And then there'll be an opportunity to have a discussion or any questions that you want to ask. And by all means, ask away through the presentation. That's the whole point of having people come along today. And we've got Louisa and Mark from the North Central CMA and the Victorian Environmental Water Holder, respectively, and we've got Steve as well, and Phil from the North Central CMA. So they can answer any questions that you might have about what the environment and what Coleman Water are doing as well in terms of this year. So as I said, the main purpose is just to let you know where we're at the moment and what are some of the things that we're looking at this year. Now we know we've been very dry for the last 2 seasons. We have got some challenges coming up this year, and we'll give you the information that we think you need, and if we're not on the right track, by all means point out what other information you do need so we make sure that we can provide that to you during the day. Okay, Loddon system. Probably preaching to everyone who knows all about it now, but when Gold Murray Water talks about the Loddon system, we're actually talking about 3 different components. The main focus of the presentation today is about the regulated system, so the supplies that come out of Curran and Tullaroop. And this is a picture I snatched off the Murray-Darling Basin Authority website last Friday, which was showing the relative volumes of the 2 major storages. That's a very sad number. That one's reversed, but it's still fairly sad, 12 to 21. Also briefly talk about the unregulated systems. Is anyone here off a stream that isn't controlled by a dam? No, all off the dams? Okay. We've got a number of streams here. There's not much I can say about them other than they've been mostly on suspension this year. I'll quickly go through that later on. And of course, Brendan will talk about the groundwater side of things. As I said, our main focus is on the regulated surface water, so the water out of the dams. And just to remind people about what the operation is with those, we have a seasonal determination policy which is followed across each of the storages that we operate across northern Victoria. In doing that, we allocate to high reliability watershares first. Then we start to build reserves for high reliability watershares once we get to 100%, and then we start to allocate to low reliability. Now I think I can safely say at the moment the low reliability is out of the question this season, as it has been for a number of years. But the key point is that we only start to build reserves after we've got to 100%. And of course last year we didn't make it to that point. We only got to 66. No, that's not right. Thank you, Bob. I'm thinking of Campaspe, sorry. And we've also got the carryover rules. So do people here have some carryover available to them at the moment? You've got some, Fraser? Yeah, in a little bit. customers can carry over up to 50% of their high reliability water shares into another year. So if we'd had 100% last year, you may have been able to carry over. But I would expect that a lot of people won't have too much carryover just because of the nature of the seasons that we've had over the last couple of years. But that's the main reason why we're currently seeing that we haven't got much in the way of operating reserves. So we're going to see some slides coming up which will show just how far behind we are in terms of being able to make an allocation, and at this point being able to operate for the entire year. But we're very confident that we will be able to get through that. As I mentioned with the unregulated streams, these are all of the systems that we operate unregulated systems within. And I've got the Loddon down here. 23 of the 38 streams that are managed by Gold Murray Water are currently suspended. That means no irrigation, and some of those have been in place for a couple of years, Dale. So those customers haven't been able to take water for irrigation, but they can take water for domestic and stock use. So anybody relying on that has been in a far worse situation than the regulated system customers. At the moment, with this sort of weather coming through, catchments are now starting to run, and I've got a couple of slides later on that will show that. We can now see that people might actually be able to get some of that water back and use going into the future. Is there any questions up to that point? Okay. I'll hand across to Brendan, who's a member of the Water Resources team. He works in the groundwater and streams team, and this is one of his key areas.
Great, thanks, Mark. Pop that in there, and that's the, the driver. Great, thanks a lot, Mark, and thanks everyone for coming along. My name's Brendan Cousins. I'm a hydrogeologist with Gold Murray Water. So I work with the groundwater resources in the Loddon catchment. The groundwater resources are really a good news story. While we haven't had much rainfall and we haven't had much surface water about, the groundwater resources are holding up really well. And we manage the groundwater resources in this area, the Mid-Loddon groundwater management area, under these local management rules. We developed these back in 2009. The rules tell us how we manage the groundwater, what trading's available, what trigger levels might apply if the groundwater levels are to fall. But the plan has served us well. It's currently up for review, and we've started the review of that plan, and we'll be consulting with the community between Malort and Midiamo over the next 12 months around that plan and the review of that plan and what it might look like into the future. But if we have a bit of a look at, what do I need to point out? Oh, there we go. This is the Mid-Loddon groundwater management area from, this is Carisbrook in the south and the Malort Plains, extending all the way up to Midiamo. It's divided into what we call 3 zones. There's the Malort zone down the bottom here to Eastville. Then there's Lanakuri Serpentine zone in the middle, and the Jarkland zone up the top here. And these are just a few groundwater levels that show us how groundwater levels have been responding over time. The groundwater levels on the y-axis here is the metres below the natural surface, and across the x-axis here, it's from 1969 all the way across to 2017. So it's the same on each of those graphs, and it shows us how those groundwater levels have been responding. I think one of our more interesting graphs is perhaps this one here. This one's on Rothicus Road, and we use this site here as our trigger level bore for the entire system. And it shows us that back in the 1960s, the groundwater levels were pretty close to the surface, only a couple of metres from the surface. Then we had a nice wet period, the groundwater levels recovered and they became artesian. Water was flowing out of the top. We had a lot of land salinity issues right through the 70s and 80s. And it wasn't until the 1990s that the groundwater levels started to decline in that area in response to reduced rainfall, but also increased groundwater usage. And we can see that increased groundwater usage by the size of these seasonal fluctuations here. So the groundwater levels fell to around 7-8 metres below the surface, and then they recovered in the floods 2010-11, and they've been falling again in recent years. We also see this seasonal fluctuation. That's 5, 10, almost 15 metres of drawdown that we see when everyone starts their pump. So they're the graphs that we see for the Mid-Loddon. We see a bit of seasonal fluctuation down here on the Malort Plains, where the deep lead aquifer is quite narrow. Here around Bridgewater, we see that the aquifers, the deep lead aquifer and the shallow aquifers are very well connected. but the groundwater levels aren't shifting all that much. And up here in the northern zone, the Jarkland zone, we see that the groundwater levels are still pretty close to the surface and within 5 metres of the surface up there. The important thing to look at in these graphs is what the groundwater level is, what its trend is, and what the variation we see seasonally is. And we can see that within each of these graphs that our current levels are within our historical range. So they're holding up pretty well. And this is the trigger graph we use to determine whether or not restrictions are required on groundwater users. So this is our trigger level from that Rothicker's Road bore. Our trigger level is at 11.5 metres below the surface. And we compare our trigger level to the rolling average of the last 3 years' groundwater recovery level. So we look at the last 3 years' maximum groundwater recovery level, and this is those three dots here, and the average of those is the pink dot. We compare the pink dot to the red line, and it shows us that groundwater levels are doing really well. This is a very resilient system. 100% allocations for the Mid-Loddon groundwater management area this season in 2016-17, and I would suggest into the future. It's a very resilient system. So looking forward, I guess, groundwater levels have been falling in the last couple of years in response to the dry conditions we've experienced, but they're within historical ranges. So we're not too concerned about the way they're trending at the moment. The groundwater levels are now recovering. They'll continue to recover throughout winter and spring, right through till about November. And that recovery is influenced by a number of factors: how much rain we get, how the rate of rainfall. So does it occur in heavy bursts, or is it drizzling over a long period that will wet up the profile and let that water seep into the profile, and how quickly the water seeps through that profile. But we're off to a good start. 100% allocations in 2016-17. So it's a very reliable resource for use or irrigators in the Mid-Loddon catchment. We do have this management plan in place. Each year we have a bit of a look at the resource, and we prepare an annual report to tell us how things are going, how much water's trading, and those kinds of things. We provide a little bit of a summary sheet that we send out to all our customers, so that's available here if anyone would like that. The licences in the Mid-Loddon groundwater management area are capped, so you can't get a new licence entitlement, but you can trade from existing licence holders. So if you had a bore on your property, or you put down a bore on your property, you can trade from someone else that's got a licence. Only 60% of the licence entitlement is typically used, or less than 60% of the licence entitlement is typically used. We've got about 34 gigalitres of licence entitlement in the Mid-Loddon, but only about 60% of that's used. So there's a little bit of water there available for trade. And permanent and temporary trade is available. And you can temporary trade for up to a maximum period of 5 years. And in the Mid-Loddon groundwater management area, we also have carryover available to our groundwater customers, and they can carry over up to 30% of their licence entitlement. So there's a couple of tools that are available there to help people manage the drier conditions. They're all the messages I've got. Andrew, do you want to add anything to that as a groundwater customer in the Mid-Loddon groundwater management area?
Probably just, like I said, there's only 60% of the water used, so I think there's obviously a lot of people there that aren't using their water, which is fine, but probably just for those people either want more water or want to put water down, contact Golden Murray Water to see if trades are available or who they can maybe get some water off. And on the other side of it, if you've got excess water and you're paying for your licence anyway, whether you use it or not, maybe you could trade a bit of your water for a bit extra cash flow. I think some people are a little bit concerned that if they temporary trade, it has a long-term impact and someone's going to take their water off them. That's not the case at all. It is just either a one-off or up to a 5-year type thing. So yeah, don't be afraid to ask a few questions if you're unsure. Because it's certainly been underutilised, I think, particularly in the dry years.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid to have a crack at it one way or the other.
Any questions around groundwater?
Just wondering if that licence entitlement used at 60%, that goes to 100%. Have you got an indication as to how that will affect your groundwater levels?
Yeah, we have. We've done that. We've done that research, the investigations to determine how much water is available in the Mid-Loddon groundwater management area, and that's why we've capped the licence entitlement 34 gigalitres. So we think that that's a sustainable amount you can take out on average.
So you said before the trigger point is about 15 metres, was it? Or?
It's at 11.5 metres below the natural surface, yeah.
6.5, so how much drop would 100% indicate?
I think, and I can't remember off the top, but I think every 5 gigalitres equates to around, at that lower end of the system, equates to around 0.8 of a metre from memory. But it's a long time ago since I looked at that. So you've got to take out a lot of water before you can drop that level. And you've got to remember that every year we're getting additional recharge into that system as well. So recharge occurs right across the Mid-Loddon area. So the rainfall that we're getting is seeping down into that groundwater system.
Yeah, that graph you had up there, Brennan, it had, I think it was the 6th of May. Well, you could already see that water had started recovering a couple of metres, and that's sort of fairly near to our place. There's a lot of irrigators around there. Well, I don't think pumping would have stopped more than 2 weeks before that. So
yeah, right.
It's amazing how quickly it does.
It's a very big aquifer. It's a very good aquifer and very transmissive. So yeah, it responds really well. Yeah, thanks.
How much of the recharge is covered in the Loddon itself? There must be a reasonable amount of it covered in the Loddon, surely there is.
From the Loddon River?
Yeah.
No, not that much. Further upstream, the Loddon River gains from the river. So the river's a gaining stream further upstream. So there's groundwater discharging into the river, and as we go further downstream, the stream starts to lose into the groundwater system, and then as we go a little bit further downstream, we get some of the water coming back into the Loddon River as well. So it's coming in and out of the system. Annually, it's not a huge volume that's lost from the river. It is a net loss, though, I think. Yeah.
So where does the water actually, like you say, run off? Will actually go into the aquifer?
That's right.
But there wouldn't be that much of that. Where does it actually come from, do you reckon? You know?
Yeah, no, most of it comes...
If there's no runoff, if we've had no runoff for the last 10 years, how come the aquifer's got a fair bit in it? Shouldn't it be going down and down and down?
So recharge is right across the plain, and so the rainfall that we get will seep down into the soil and then down to the groundwater system.
You shouldn't seep down too far in our place, the last place.
No, you don't have to put the shovel in too far, do you?
Further south though, aren't you, Brennan? We're talking way back towards...
It does. It feeds in from back at Newland, but most of the recharge is across the plains here.
I think it comes a bit further than that, because Kane's factory in the middle of Ballarat has got 2 big bores, and that's tapping into our lead. And CRA at Eastville proved that it was a 6,000 megalitre a year flow through Eastville. So that's where the bulk of the recharge comes from.
Oh, that's about 6,000, 5,000, 6,000 megalitres a year there, Frank. But across the whole plain, we get more than that.
That's the fresh part. That's the very fresh water coming in.
Good quality water.
That's what's keeping Mid-Loddon northern area usable, and that leads on to what I'm here for. Is where the hinge line is, which you haven't shown as yet, or maybe I've missed it. We should not be allowing any transfer of licence upstream from that hinge line, because if you took the recent sale of Trevor James's water, if that amount of water had been transferred to Malort, our freshening flow would not have been enough to keep it usable down here. So I think that's what you've got to do in the future. Don't allow any transfer further south upstream than the hinge line.
Well, we might take the opportunity after the meeting, Frank, to catch up and talk about that a little bit more. And there will be an opportunity as we progress with the review of the local management rules to talk about those kinds of trading options. But I might hand back over to Mark now and give you an opportunity to talk a little bit about the regulated system.
Doesn't want me to go. Tag, which I have got stuck in the chair.
Thanks, Mark. Thank you. Thank you very much.
I'll just pop those things over here if anyone wants to take a minute.
Brendan just gave a quick highlight before when he flicked forward. So. The Millennium Drought, that horrible thing that lasted for 15 years and some might say is still actually haunting us in the last 5 years, have been something out of the ordinary going forward. Unfortunately, we're not going to know for quite some time. But what I can do is talk about some of the things that have changed in the management of water in the Loddon system since the Millennium Drought, and through a lot of the reviews that have been conducted, and in some cases a bit of soul searching, I suppose, about what has happened. So just purely looking at the resources in the regulated system, and most of the presentation for the rest, or most of the rest of the presentation is actually about the regulated system. Back in 2007 through to around about late July 2010, Cairn Curran was sitting at a very low volume, at about 5-6% of capacity. Then it turned really, really wet. And then we had those couple of events in January 2011 where we saw a lot of water come in very, very quickly and a lot of water go out very, very quickly, and unfortunately impact a lot of people downstream as well. But under those circumstances, we actually saw Cairn Curran get filled very quickly. We had a couple of bits of drawdown where there was a bit of water used by customers both in the Loddon system itself and also by the Goulburn system customers, which the Loddon can supply a supplement to. But then over the last 3 or 4 years, we've started to see a gradual drawdown. Had a bit of a recovery in 13-14, but certainly over the last 2 years, we've seen this gradual drawdown to where we are today. Although barely perceptible, there is a little kick there. So we've started to see a little bit of flow coming in. Tullaroop Reservoir, very similar circumstances. Very low, down to about 5, perhaps 4 gigalitres at one point, which was causing a lot of difficulties for one of our regional water customers, the Central Highlands Water, which takes water across to Maryborough out of Central Highlands Water. Very low water quality, quite high salinity content. Again, we saw a very quick recovery, and then we saw these spikes where we had some very strong events come through, fill the dam, overfill the dam in some cases. And then again, we've seen not as good a recovery in 13-14, but then a bit of a slower takeaway, but then we actually haven't seen much of a recovery into Tullaroop at the moment. So in terms of the resource, we did see a really quick response in wetter conditions. They were at the time of a La Nina event, and there is a potential for a La Nina event to develop here as well. But in terms of with those, we also saw a number of rule changes that came about. One was a bit more flexibility for customers to carry over water if they had it available to them. So it started out at 30% of your licence volume, went up to 50%. There has been some changes in the water share ownership. The Commonwealth came in and purchased some water, and they hold around about a bit over 3,000 megalitres of high reliability water shares now. The Victorian Environmental Water Holder was established. There was already a bulk entitlement for those customers, so a licence to a specific amount of water and some operating rules that we had to follow as Goulburn Murray Water. And at the moment, the holdings in the Victorian Environmental Water Holder are at about almost 11,000 megalitres of high reliability water shares. And within that, the environmental water holder can use it as it sees fit, just like another customer who wants to use water at a particular time. They're the key things that have changed, but also this one here, which is a passing flow reduction. So one of the things that happened at the time of the Millennium Drought was that we went to a thing called qualification of rights, where existing rules were basically discarded or set aside for a period of time with the permission of the Minister, and we were doing emergency operations. So very low flows throughout the system, and in some cases there was dry parts of the Loddon, particularly down towards Serpentine and a bit beyond. Passing flows were brought down to a fairly large extent. To avoid having to go back to the qualification of rights, there is a negotiation period which we can do in the bulk entitlement, which is a short-term action to try and improve water resource availability. It's not about providing additional resource for allocation, it's about providing resource to operate the system, to get water to the people who need it, and use it for critical human water needs. such as flushing toilets or whatever in their house. So with those changes and what we've seen at the moment, and you can see the drawdown that we've been experiencing in the systems, we'll just talk about what has happened, and particularly focusing on the last year, which has been one of the worst years in terms, well, when I say last year, last water year, the one that's just finished on the 30th of June. It's been one of the worst years we've seen for a long time in the Loddon system. Now, at the moment, this is a snapshot of what happened July 2015 to June 2016. And we've got Lake Eildon up here just to give you an indication of a comparison against one of the bigger systems, one of the more resilient systems. So over the 12-month period, for instance, Eildon received about 525 gigalitres, 525,000 megalitres of water. That was about 36% of the long-term average. And POE is probability exceedance. If you think of it statistically, in 96 years out of 100, you would have more flow to be received. So it's actually, for 4 years out of 100, you can get less. So a very low proportion of those years. If we come to the Loddon system, and we've got the Broken and Campaspe systems that are experiencing similar conditions to what has been experienced here in the Loddon. But if you look at Cairncurran, only 3%, and Tullaroop, only 1% of its long-term average inflow. And inflows that would be beaten 99 years out of 100. In fact, that's closer to a new minimum for that 12-month period. So very low replenishment of inflows. But I guess one of the things we have to be conscious of is under the way in which allocations are done, we have to allocate water to you. We can't hold it back in reserve for your own good for the next year, because some people will want to use it up front. Other people would say, well, we'd like to have it reserved. But the policy is that we have to allocate it up front. Now looking at this, and we're saying, okay, we're 97, 99s, 3%, July through to June. This is the month of June, okay, so the one we've just completed. It's still not good, but it's a bit better. But this is 6% of the monthly average for the month of June, 13%. Across in Eildon, they got 95% of that monthly inflow. So things are starting to wet up, a bit slower over this side of the northern parts of Victoria, but we're still starting to see a bit better response. If you think, 77 compared to 96 and 99s, that's not bad comparatively. It's all relative, but it's a bit of an improvement. And if you actually look at the volumes, 1.6 gigalitres of inflow in June, it was only 3.9 for the entire year. So a third of the inflow came in 1 month, which is a good sign because it's actually going in the right direction. The other thing is looking at the tributaries. So Loddon River at Newstead, upstream of Cairncurran. These were responses to rainfall events last week, so Saturday 25th and then Friday the 1st of July. We actually got some good kicks in flow. So that's up to, probably easier for me to look here, about 300 megalitres a day. It's still not a huge volume. It's not going to save you for the entire year, but it's the right trend. A bit more rain will see that kick again and hopefully go higher and persist longer as well. Similar at Jimco Creek at Yandoit. Not as high, but still the response is okay. A bit more rain on top of that and we'll see it kick again. This was to yesterday. So trends are going in the right direction. And upstream of Tullaroop Reservoir, we're also seeing some better flows. They're not as high, that's about 56 megalitres roughly per day, but it's heading the right way. So there wasn't a lot of rain in that, but it actually kicked up the inflows into the storages, which is what we would love to see at this time of year. Now, bearing in mind that we're actually starting to see the systems run, and as you said before, there hadn't been much runoff for the last couple of years, or last 11 years, I think you said. But this is a good trend because it's certainly much better than it was for a lot of last year, and as you would be aware, the spring inflows didn't really occur. So this is the 3-month rainfall outlook that you can get off the Bureau of Meteorology. Hot off the press last week, the 30th of June. And if you look at the region that we're in, it's showing that the chances of getting above the median rainfall, so the long-term statistics, You know, sort of 70 to 80% in this area, which is, again, a good outlook. If I was standing up here talking to you at the same time last year, we would have been looking at a very brown-coloured map of Australia. I'm not really impressed with the way they use that to show just the colour of the ground as it's going to go and the grass, but it is good to see that they're heading in the right direction. And El Nino, that horrible event that occurred last year and has decimated us a couple of times in the last 10 years, is gone, dead, buried, cremated, to use Tony's words. But at the moment they're saying a La Nina event, which typically brings above average winter and spring rainfall, is still possible. But at the moment, the way in which the Indian Ocean is warming off the northwest coast of Australia is actually driving most of the influence of weather across northern Victoria. And that's good, because that's going to contribute to that rainfall that we're so craving at the moment. Now, in terms of what all this means for water resource availability across the Loddon system itself and across northern Victoria, as I mentioned right at the start, we announced the allocations last Friday, getting a bit ahead of myself, or behind. Only 2 systems were able to get that positive number, so the larger Murray and Goulburn systems. Unfortunately, the Broken, the Campaspe, the Loddon and the Bullock are all sitting on 0, and in a moment you'll see why they're sitting on 0. But one of the things that has contributed to the Murray and the Goulburn getting above 0 at the moment is the fact we were able to put water aside last year for operations. I'll talk about that a little bit more in a moment, but between 30 and 50% roughly in the Goulburn and Murray systems, for every 2 megalitres of resource improvement, 1 goes towards an operating reserve for the following season and 1 goes towards allocations. We don't do that at the moment in the Loddon system. We have looked at it and it's hard to do because it doesn't always work. In the Murray and the Goulburn systems, you will never have a 0 under that, a 0 on the 15th of August, according to the long-term records. So I can never say never, but you should never have a 0 at that point. Doesn't work in the Loddon, and that was even if we took between 0 and 100% of high reliability water shares, taking half of the resource to the following year's reserve. It's not to say that we shouldn't look at that again. We both certainly will be looking at that again with colleagues from the department. This is where current resources sit in the Loddon system. So this is what we call our water resource diagram. Some people will refer to them as the rockets that you might see, the rocket diagrams. The easiest way to look at them is this is what we've got in the bank and this is what our debt is. So we've got commitments against how much water is in the dams that we can't get out under gravity without some sort of intervention. What do we need to operate through the season in terms of evaporation losses out of the river and out of the storages themselves? How much water do we lose transmitting the water to the points where it's taken? How much do we have to set aside for other bulk water users, such as Colvin Water, Central Highlands Water, the Victorian Environmental Water Holder? What's available in terms of allocated volume? So allocations from last year that have been carried over. And what are the trade commitments? So that's where water has been traded out of the Goulburn system into the Murray system. So it creates a debt from that system into the Goulburn. So at the moment you can see that we've only got 34.3 gigalitres sitting in storage. So that's taking into account Cairncurran, Tullaroop and Lanakuri. We've got a little bit of inflow, but we've got a bit of a debt here, about 16 gigalitres. That's how far behind we are in terms of making an allocation this season. The other important thing to know is that we've got this water in terms of urban environment and the remaining allocated volume. That's considered to be sacrosanct. So really you could almost put that down here at the foundation. And if you look at it that way, we haven't got enough water to operate through the season at this point in time. If we operate to our standard operating procedures. So what we can do in terms of system operations, so we can actually lower that because we'd be supplying lower volumes, and that then reduces the losses that we have to set aside. But there's still a risk that we're going to be a bit short, and I've forgotten the exact number. Bob, can you recall? I'll show it in a minute. 4 or 5, sure. So that's one of the key things to take away from today, is that we do have a shortfall at the moment, but we have the conditions that are looking to get us through. The other thing that we did last Friday was put out the outlook for the coming season. Now, what these are all based on is inflow conditions going into the major storages, Tulloop, Cancurran. So at the moment, we're sitting somewhere between below average and dry if you look at what has happened over the last month. So under those circumstances, if we keep getting inflows and say we're hovering somewhere in here, we might actually start to see that we fill that gap that I was just talking about quite quickly. Because once we fill that gap, we're at the point of being able to make allocations, and there is no concern about operating the system throughout the year. So even under a dry scenario, say we're getting inflows, and by dry I mean inflows that would be beaten 90 years out of 100, and you saw before they were about 99 through the last 12 months, which was extraordinarily dry. If we get those flows, it might be late, but for people with allocation, we will get to a point sometime between August and October where we can announce that we've got the system secure, we can operate. Still recognise that it's a very low number, and I'm not trying to downgrade what that actually means for customers who are reliant upon the water, but we can operate the system throughout the year. And that's an important point, I think, in terms of how customers can look at what's happening this year. If we get average conditions, we'll get to 100%, a bit later than we would like, but we'll still have relatively good volumes available up front. Is there any questions at that point?
So
Jim?
Your carryover water,
Yep.
what point does that become available?
It's available now. We're not restricting anything at the moment, mainly because we know what the weather conditions are doing. And I'll go through a little bit more in a moment, Jim, just about some of this. But we know that the chances of getting inflows are better than not getting them at the moment. So we're not planning to do any sort of restriction on availability to water up front. We are benefiting from some assistance from our colleagues in the other agencies, which I'll acknowledge in a moment. But there's no impact on ability to take water at the moment.
I thought you had only 1% allocation to carryover.
No. And that's one of the key things we're trying to do. So I've probably just already given you a bit of a snapshot about what that is. And I think what Jim is getting through is that one. If at the moment it doesn't rain for the rest of the season, pretty low chance, but I can never say it's never going to happen. Deliveries of carryover won't be available through the year, and there won't be allocations through the year. That, we believe, is pretty unlikely, but we've got a plan for it just in case it happens. So the good news, which I keep wanting to emphasise, the catchments are now responding to rain. So when we do get that bit of rain coming through, it's putting water into the dams. And it's, one, it's assisting you on your properties, but two, it's putting water into the dams, which means that we can get through the season. The chances of that continuing are good. The Bureau, for its faults in getting temperatures right on a day-to-day basis, usually does get the outlook relatively right. Unfortunately, they got it right completely last year. They said there was going to be an El Nino. And the risks are decreasing for the Loddon system with each passing day. But we do need to keep getting that rain and water. Now, I wanted to come out and talk to you about that today to let you know fairly early in the season what that risk was, but to also tell you that you still can access your water right now. So obviously we need to do things to help you, and that's what we're doing. I think it goes without saying we're monitoring that one very, very closely, but we're trying to save water wherever we can as well. So we'll be lowering weir pools such as Bridgewater, Serpentine. That helps with evaporation loss, small amount, but every little drop helps. We'll schedule deliveries, and this is not for people taking domestic in stock, it's for people who want to take an irrigation delivery. So we can actually schedule it to make sure we get the timing right. We don't put too much water down, and we actually put more water down than we need to. Working closely with Loddon and Central Highlands Water about what their needs are in terms of supplying the towns. Like Central Highlands has got Maryborough, but Loddon has got Bridgewater itself, Jarklin, Inglewood, Lanakuri. We're also working very closely with Louisa and Mark from the Victorian Environmental Water Holder, and I've spoken about the fact that we've already started to reduce passing flows. So that's through the entire system from Cairncurran and Tullaroop down to, for our end of the system, it's the Waranga Western Channel. So they have agreed to reduce the passing flow requirements at this stage. And what we'll also do is enable some of the water that they need later on in the season to come out of the Goulburn system. And that'll be supplied out of their account in the Goulburn system. So we owe a debt of gratitude to what the CMA and View are doing there. As I mentioned, we're talking about the reduced evaporation losses, the reduced passing flows, and one thing that we are considering doing, we're not planning to implement it yet, but it is in our back pocket to do later on, is to borrow some of that inter-valley trade water that was sitting at the top of the commitment in the rocket diagram. With that, it actually retains water in the system, and that will contribute to the operating water that we need to get through the year. To put it graphically, some of the risks that I've been talking about. When we first started looking at things, just before the start of December was when we started to run out of water in the Loddon system. Not a very nice prospect. If we reduce passing flows, we get about an extra month out of that. If we reduce the passing flows and borrow inter-valley trade water, we're comfortable we'll get through the vast bulk of the system, vast bulk of the season, I should say. It still means that 17-18 is looking absolutely diabolical, which is not a good prospect. But for getting through this season at least, we should be able to get through doing that. We're hopeful and fairly confident we won't have to do that. We're only talking about a small volume anyway. But we should be able to get through the season using that combination of factors. Now, the key thing with that, and I've mentioned it a couple of times, is that this is only about prolonging the operation of the system from one end to the other. It's not talking about providing increased seasonal determinations. So for people who don't have large seasonal determinations or allocation, there is a challenge there for you, and we recognise that. That's really where the rain and the water into the dams is going to be critical. So any questions on that point? Stunned silence. Okay. One of the other measures, and this is more about looking ahead through the season itself and impacts on what is happening across Northern Victoria with a number of the different customer groups, is that even with this, we recognise the impacts that difficult conditions are having just upon ability to pay for the bills that Golden Murray Water sends. So we've made some changes to the way in which that occurs. There's a bit more time and a bit more flexibility in which to pay those bills as well. So one thing is that we're offering 8 monthly instalments, or if they pay, customers pay in full, they get a 4% discount, which is twice as much as earlier. But we'll obviously be, both with this and with the water resource operations, we'll be talking with you regularly. Now, we're happy to come out again at future points and let you know what's happening, but we'll also be providing further detail when we do the updates to the seasonal allocations on the 1st and 15th of each month. We've got another announcement due on the 15th. We'll give an update on that outlook that I showed you, or the table that we showed just before. And as I mentioned, quite happy to come out and talk to yourselves at any time about what might be happening and what we can actually do and let you know where we're getting to. At any time, please feel free to ring GMW on the toll-free number or go through our website, and there's an email coming up in a moment. There's also the Victorian Resource Manager website, which also provides information about outlooks, provides information about how inflows are trending and what that's providing. And of course, we can also speak to your local diversions inspector or to Dale as the local customer service manager for diversions in the Loddon region. And of course, the reception at gmwater.com.au. I've got a couple of cards. I know Brendan has his before, and I must admit, I never even thought of it, but you're more than welcome to give me a call at any time as well. And well, I manage the water resources, so I oversee the groundwater, the surface water elements of Golden Murray Water. More than happy to discuss what we're doing and what we can actually help you out with.